Hey, Joe here. Want to show you something really quick. I was doing a mix, shooting a video for a client of me mixing their song, which is really fun. And we got to the bass, and we'd already got some really good sounding drums. This is with hardly any real plugins, just doing some phase checks and a little bit of EQ and setting levels and things like that. And came to bass. And he provided me with two bass tracks. So one's a line input or a DI track, and then one is an amp with a microphone, right? Very typical. One thing most people will do is they'll pull them up and they'll say, okay, cool. You know, the DI signal sounds like this, and then the amp signal sounds like this. The amp signal has a little more mid-range, the DI has a little more bass. I'm going to blend them together, and it's going to sound like this. And then they move on and start doing EQ, right? Nothing technically wrong with that, but what are you hearing? If I'm listening to this in EQing, you can just see it on the EQ curve here. There's a lot of buildup in this 100 to 150, 200 hertz range. There's a lot of this. Which, depending on the song, to me, that usually ends up being too much mid-range for the bass. I lose a lot of the big, beefy low end, which I don't like. So the solution, I'd come in here and do some sort of EQ, right? And I'd wrestle with it, and it would sound maybe okay, and I'd probably have a fine mix. But the one thing I remembered to do in this mix, I'm glad I did, is to put a mix tool, which is just a plugin that lets me invert the phase. Another word for that is invert polarity, on one of these bass tracks. Just to see, because two copies of the same signal, two copies of the same performance, it's very likely that they can be out of phase. So why not check it? It's a little extra work, but it can make a big difference. So here it is. I'm going to play it without the phase inverted, and then I'm going to invert it and listen to how different it is. And I'll flip back and forth. Wildly different, right? Now, sometimes you'll do this and there'll be little difference or subtle difference and you won't really care one way or the other. And then sometimes it's a drastic difference. Now, you may prefer one over the other. I'll tell you which one I prefer in just a second. But even if we go look, take the bass and go find a note and zoom in on it, the two tracks, we can see they're not quite lined up. This one came through an amp, so it was delayed a little bit. And then if we look, let's find a really good transient like this one. It looks in theory like this one's a little delayed, which is going to mess things up, but also this waveform starts moving down, this one starts moving up, which tells me that maybe the DI input and the microphone are out of phase with each other. Now, that could be a good or a bad thing. It doesn't really matter, even if it's technically wrong. What matters is how it sounds. But to me, when I flip the polarity of one of the mics or one of the inputs, suddenly that EQ that I was going to have to do was already done. That heavy, excessive mid-range at like the 100 to 150 hertz spot went away, and now I've got this nice deep low end without a huge excessive amount of mid-range. To me, that's a better bass sound. Let's listen to it again. That's got a lot of that mid-range. Flip it, and suddenly it doesn't. It almost feels like I've moved some of that stuff out of the way, so now I can maybe go to my bass bus and I could maybe boost the deep low end a little bit and get a really big chest thumping bass sound. And maybe I do EQ that mid-range a little bit still. But if you remember before when I was EQing that earlier, no matter where I put that EQ, it still sounded funky. It still had a mid-range there, and if I took all the mid-range out, then that sucks too. So it was kind of a catch-22, no way around it until we flip the polarity, and now we've got a bass part that's really, really useful. Add in the drums, which sound great already. Great tune. So hats off to Ola, my client. Great sounding drums and bass. I'm going to go back to mixing, but I wanted to stop and show you this. Hope it was helpful. See ya.